Welcome to the Home Business Podcast with Richard Captain Henderson, publisher of Home Business Magazine, and Sherilyn Colleen, managing editor. This how-to show helps you successfully operate your home-based business.
Greetings and welcome to the Home Business Podcast. I'm Richard Captain Henderson, your skipper at Home Business TV. Let's secure, foresee, and get underway. We've all felt it at one time or another. Running a home-based business is hard. Sometimes it feels like hard is a habit. But it doesn't have to be this way. Let's face it, work and business are challenging. Have you ever wondered if you are on the right path? And what can you do to break out of old habits and start seeing things in a new way, a way that makes things easier? Today's podcast guest, Chris Westfall, wants to help you discover your own easier pathways to greater freedom and to clarity around your business identity. Chris Westfall is the author of the new book, Easier, 60 Ways to Make Your Work Life Work for You. Easier to talk about the book and a new way to approaching leadership, such as in your business. So greetings, Chris Westfall. Welcome to the Home Business Podcast. Say hello to our audience.
Hello, audience, and thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here.
Let's see a copy of that book.
It's right here, sir. I got it right here for you.
Cool. A new, awesome book in print. There's nothing like print. I mean, digital is digital, but there's nothing like a good hard copy of a book. And you're calling in from Houston today?
That's right. I am here. This is my home office in Houston, Texas.
Oh, cool. Anyway, we love books. New books bring new ideas and new ways of looking at business, and we'll appreciate your perspective today. So why don't we roll on in with this? Let's get to know you a little bit better. So you are an author, business coach, speaker, and consultant. Let's hear your elevator pitch.
You'd be surprised how many times people ask me for that. You know how when you tell somebody about yourself that they call it an elevator pitch.
I
you
hate
just ask for the elevator pitch.
Yeah, I hate
right?
the term elevator pitch, because it sounds like, you're bothering somebody, in an elevator, like bugging what they got for. But I don't know. It's I guess it kind of sums it up. But so your elevator pitch.
It's no bother at all. It's no bother at all. But a few years back, I was recognized as the U.S. National Elevator Pitch Champion. And ever since that recognition, people have been asking me for my elevator pitch.
I didn't know that before we started this podcast, honest.
That's
really
kind of funny. Yeah, I was recognized as the U.S. National Elevator Pitch Champion. I know, and people are like going, "Well, where is it? What? Show us something, please. Dance for us, please."
Well, I mean, that's kind of an interesting angle. I mean, what? Not to get away from your elevator pitch, but what are some key principles? Like, is there a certain length to it that obviously makes a better pitch than others?
That's a great question. What you want to do is share your elevator pitch up until the point when someone says, "Tell me more." A lot of people will tell you that an elevator pitch is 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. The contest that I won was 118 seconds.
About 2 minutes then. Okay.
Yeah, about just a little bit shy of 2 minutes. But the real way to look at an elevator pitch is not as a pitch at all. Look at it as the beginning to a conversation, which is really how I think you intended it, and certainly how I try to present when I'm asked for an elevator pitch. It really is a request to start a conversation. And when you think about the pitch that you're about to give, think about the tell me more, the question that you would love to be asked, the question from your listener that's going to show that you've created some sort of intrigue or interest, rather than turning into a pitch man and pitching someone on something, right?
I just visualize somebody like looking away and looking at the buttons on the elevator, like,
That's right. Get me out of here. Why didn't I take the stairs?
Oh, well, cool. It's only a couple minutes then. Let's, what's your pitch there then?
You know how everybody seems to be tied to the pursuit of success, especially when it comes to owning a home business. I'm an entrepreneur. I work from my home. And so I can really relate to that pursuit of perfection. But one of the things that I've discovered, and it's just two simple words that keep me from accessing success, These two words are buy now. I should have $1 million business by now. I should have that new Tesla in the driveway by now. I should be able to get along with my wife by now. Too personal? Maybe. But the point is, those two words keep us from seeing the success that is right now.
So an elevator pitch doesn't have to be like a bio on yourself. It's more of something way to catch people's interest on, a key competency that you can, that you have for them if needed.
I think that's the idea, because everyone wants to access success. And what we have to realize, and what I help my clients to realize, is that success isn't something that's out there. It's not a number in your bank account. It is something that is inside of you. And when we let go of the idea of buy now, we can see that success is here right now. And
So
my
like-
elevator pitch is
So your
always
elevator
about
pitch is
right now.
capture them to find out more information and kind of draw them into the discussion. We're scratch the easier podcast. Let's just do a podcast on an elevator pitch. No, I mean, that's a fascinating subject. Particularly, I think it's important because more and more people are getting out of that personal interaction, maybe trying to do an elevator pitch on Zoom or something, which really doesn't, make having those interactions and connections. It's a good thing. So anyway, Chris, life isn't easy. So how can you write a book called Easier? Are you saying that life can be easier? And if so, how?
Life can actually be pretty difficult. And I got to tell you, I've got a PhD in being hard on myself, which is actually why I wrote a book called Easier. Because here's the thing that I realized: if being hard on myself were going to work, it would have worked by now. I've discovered that in any situation, any circumstance, any relationship, easier always exists. Now, that's not to say that life is easy, or that relationships are easy, or running a home business is easy. I'm not saying that. That's a bridge too far. Mm-hmm. But you can show up in the midst of any circumstances in a way that makes things easier, because easier always exists.
Also, it's kind of a way you perceive things then. It's a perception you can bring. The circumstances aren't going to change. It's how you kind of look at it then.
Correct. And your ability to access adaptability and to shift your perspective. The circumstances don't change, but how you show up and your relationship with your circumstances, that's always within your control and your ability to change.
Yeah, I like what you also said about at the start of it, being hard on yourself. That's a problem. I mean, I'll sit there and I'll mess something up and I'll be fuming at it later that day. You've got to just move on. And, not just keep cycling back over something that you kind of messed up. I guess maybe it's just figure out how to, make an improvement on it, so you're not doing that in the future. I don't know.
Well, I tell you, the improvement that shows up for me is, I have a service business and I serve my clients, and but I don't give myself the same service. I give all my compassion and my caring to my clients, and I don't leave any back for myself. And one of the things that I've discovered is that the first thing that really needs fixing isn't something that needs fixing at all. It's just a little bit of compassion about the way that I go forward in not just serving my clients, but serving myself. I mean, one of the things I've learned in running a home business is that a good life is good for business. And if I'm not taking care of myself, how can I really take care of others? And so it's just, I think the first adjustment for me is just finding a little bit of caring instead of, scolding or punishing myself or treating myself like a variable that needs to be fixed or beat back into submission somehow.
Yeah, you're talking about, work
on.
and life. It'll bleed over then too, and outside of business, if don't learn to let things go. But Chris, this isn't a typical business book. It's more of a story that you've written. Why did you choose to create a story for the book?
For the same reason we're talking here, because people enjoy stories, and we live in a YouTube generation where we want to watch and observe and learn from others' experiences so that we can create our own. And I didn't want to write a book that was a series of blog posts or some sort of instruction manual. I feel like that's not a book that I want to write. That's not a book that I want to read. But inside this story, which is a conversation between a client and a coach, there are discoveries to be made. And everyone who's read this book, who has given me feedback, it's really interesting. Everyone has their own personal experience of it and their own personal journey of what they observe. And that, to me, is what I wanted to create, was an experience for the reader. So that's
well,
why
they
I chose
say
to
that
write
the
as a
best
narrative.
way to get a point across is work it into a story. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a key sales technique to try to weave in a story for the product or service you're selling.
Yeah. Stories help us to connect and help us to understand ourselves and create that sort of human connection that I think is very vital.
You have, talk about creating the story of the client and the coach within your book. So, Chris, are you the client or the coach, or maybe both?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to say both. Yeah, the story, it's not my story per se, and yet it is deeply my story. I have been both the client and the coach. There is also an element, as you can imagine, in a business fable. There's an element of imagination, and an element of following where the conversation leads. And this is why this was the book that, for the first time, this is the book that came through me. It's very interesting, this process that I went through of creating this book. And it took about 6 weeks to write the entire book, because once I found the thread of who these gentlemen were and the challenges that they were both facing, because they both have challenges that they go through in the course of the story, I was able to create the narrative. And I made a promise to myself. I said, look, if there is not something that comes authentically out of this story, I'm not going to write about it. I'm not going to twist the narrative to go make a point. I'm going to let the points come authentically. And I think that authenticity, hopefully, is what comes across inside the book for the reader.
That's kind of interesting. So you're framing a story, and as this, you can't know exactly where the story is going to go, but as you're writing the story, it's bringing things into it, and that would definitely build some authenticity with it.
Well, going through this process, I hired a coach. I hired a coach to help me with writing the book. And
a coach helping a coach.
Indeed. Well, and people say, wait, you're a coach to others. Why do you have a coach? And the answer is very simple: because I want to win. Because right. I want to do well. I want to make a difference. And I didn't want, this to be just any run of the mill book. I wanted to do the best that I could. And I knew that it wouldn't be my best work if I was on a journey alone.
Well, 6 weeks that's a pretty good timeline for a book. I know people have written a book, it drags on for a year, but like working with a coach, did they help you pick out some good points as you're going along to weave in as you're going through that creative process?
Well, here's what she said to me. And it's just what you were just saying, is that, life is a lot like writing. We figure out where the narrative is going to go. I mean, just like I didn't know what chapter 3 was going to be until I wrote chapter 2. It's the same thing with life. It's constantly evolving. And when I get frustrated is when I'm trying to figure out a 19-step plan where my life should be by now, like we were talking about before. And I'm everywhere except in this moment. I'm everywhere except where my business needs me to be. I'm everywhere except where my relationships need me to be. And when I came to that place and that realization, my coach simply said to me, what if it's all writing? And I said, what do you mean? What if it's all right? And she's like, well, you're writing the narrative of this book. You're writing the narrative for these characters. Why aren't you creating the life that you want to live? Why aren't you writing your own story and then living it?
So you were living the life you wanted in the writing.
Well, I'll tell you something. This it's not just the book that I needed to write. It's the book that I need to read. I'm a specialist at being hard on myself. I'm a recovering perfectionist, and some days the recovery is going better than others.
Perfection is the enemy of good enough. So you made a good comment about writing, and I just remembered a saying that if it doesn't write, it doesn't work. In other words, if you have good ideas and things like that, but if you can't write it down into a plan or put it into writing, it may not work. And I've kind of followed that rule of thumb. And it seems like if there is something I want to do or some kind of approach and I can't write it up coherently, it kind of falls off the table.
I know what you mean. And one of the things that I've discovered is that, I mean, this is my new pen, and I'm, you can see I'm holding up my phone here. I turn on the audio recorder, and writing doesn't have to involve a keyboard. Sometimes writing is as simple as storytelling. Sometimes it's just as simple as collecting your thoughts and speaking into the world what it is that you would like to find. It's kind of a twisted quote to say it, but as you speak, so shall you find. And that's something that I've discovered, is that writing is really about storytelling, and then stepping into the story that you'd like to create for yourself.
They say you're supposed to kind of, like, when you're writing, speak, be speaking in your writing. And I've always found that if I'm starting to write something, and next thing you know, I'm speaking, and then it seems to flow together a little bit better. But Chris, what if people are in a difficult work environment, or facing, changes in their business, or disappointments? We've hit some of these. What are some ideas to make things easier?
The first thing that I would share is that you don't have to go it alone. And when it looks like, if it's got to be, it's up to me, and you're on an island where you're trying to lift the world by yourself, I'd step back from that misunderstanding. One of the key benefits of a coaching relationship is an opportunity to share your ideas and not feel like you are on an island, not feel like you are Atlas trying to lift the world by yourself. And sometimes just being able to share can help you to access the most valuable tool inside of any home business today. And that tool is straight up the conversation. The ability to have a conversation and a dialogue, and to create this story that you and I are talking about, the opportunity to share things. So that's one thing that I would look at. The other thing that I would look at is that there's a lot of bad advice out there, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
And people,
just open up your
say,
computer in the morning and start looking at news feeds.
Yeah, and there's a lot of armchair quarterbacks out there that are sharing their perspective, and everybody has a right to that perspective. But in the middle of all this information, there's a quote in the book: "Today, having power means knowing what to ignore." And sometimes what we have to realize is that where we put our attention is where we find our results. And when we have challenges and circumstances that are tough, it's only natural to look at those circumstances and go, I got to figure this out. I've got to figure this out. I got to sort this out. Well, how's that working for you? Because in my experience, when I'm trying harder is not the way to make things easier. And that's not to say give up, leave it, but I am saying where you put your attention is where you find your results. And if a train of thought keeps showing up and it's bringing you frustration, maybe that's not your train.
That's really adaptable to today, where we've gone from, say 20 years ago, where you picked out the information you wanted to read. Now you're bombarded with it. I mean, it's information overload. So if you don't develop that skill you're talking about to, what should you be ignoring and what you should be focusing on, you're going to get crushed.
It's true. And focusing on what is it that is going to help you most is where my coaching work begins. And if people are out there in difficult circumstances, sometimes some simple questions can help find new possibilities. And one of the questions that I like to ask in the middle of a difficult circumstance is, what's good about this? Over time, over the pandemic, we've all had things taken from us. That's no secret. And we've all experienced a sense of loss, a loss of freedom, or whatever the case may be, each of us to our own accord. But the point is that in the midst of these difficulties, which we've all been through, choice always exists. But often we don't see it. We get locked into the idea there's only one way to figure this out. There's only one way that this gets resolved. And as a coach, the minute I hear that, I say, no, you got to stop, because your job is not to figure out the one way. It's to figure out every way to play the game of life, every way to win at your home business. And if it looks like there's only one possibility, that's a misunderstanding. Because think about it. How many possibilities exist right now?
Got to be,
we could talk about anything.
Infinite,
It's infinite. It's infinite. But and it sounds like I need to personalize this, because this is my story.
Yeah.
When I get lost in thought, it looks like I get tunnel vision. There's only one way that I can do things. There's only one way. There's only one path to success. Well, that's false. There are many paths. And as Edison said, there is a way to do it better. Find it. That's the job.
A key point you're bringing out, and I don't think that's something good from this podcast, and we can't say it enough, is you can't get rigid and locked in your thinking. Particularly, I think, I don't know, just a theory off the cuff here. It seems like with all the information that's bombarding you, if you don't like keep an open mind, it might even cause you to get more rigid because you get confused with everything that's out there, and you go down the path of a good enough solution or whatever, and you really should keep your eyes open on a better way to do things.
Yeah. And the good news is that adaptability is built into the system. We are wired to adapt. It is part of our DNA. It is part of who we are. It's part of the design. And I talk about that in the book, about the way, and I mean, this may sound very grand, but it's about the way that the universe is designed. And there is a kindness in the design of the universe that we don't often share with ourselves. And I'm speaking of a universe where I've experienced grief, loss, difficulty, financial challenges. I mean, I could go on. I could go on. But in the middle of this, guess what? I'm still here, and so are you. Despite my circumstances, I soldier on, I push on. And the reason is not because I'm Superman, but because human beings, all of us, we are wired to adapt. Resilience, it's like 5 fingers on a hand.
We would have never crawled out of those caves if we hadn't gotten adaptable.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And the entrepreneurs that I work with, the innovation that I see all the time, where does that come from? The answer is it's inside of all of us. We may not access it. We may not have an appetite to access innovation and creativity, but it exists.
It keeps coming up in my discussions about entrepreneurs. It ends up being back to the caveman model. Maybe there's another book there, but let's discuss another point of your book, Easier: how to pivot from how do I get through this to, what can I get from this?
How do I get through this is a coping question. And I had some difficult circumstances. I lost someone very close to me. I lost my father to COVID during the pandemic. And I found myself being just crushed with grief, quite frankly. I would start weeping at a stoplight. And I was like, man, you gotta pull yourself together. How am I supposed to get through this? And that was the question that I kept asking myself, and I couldn't find the answers. And I was just lost in my grief. And one day, and I don't know how it happened, but I just decided, I said, how can I shift from how do I get through this to what can I get from this? And what I got from this, just asking that question, was the realization that I didn't want my grief to go away. Because if I could cut out that part of myself, it'd be like cutting off my arm. It would mean that I would have to cut off everything that my father.
So you're saying kind of the grief had become a part of your identity in the short term.
And what I could get from this was the ability to accept who I was, to accept the grief. Did that make the grief go away? No. But did it make it easier? Yes. As easy as grief, if easy and grief can even be used in a sentence together without feeling like it's a bridge too far. But I found for me a path out of difficult circumstances that started when I saw that there was something that I could get from this. And the book is dedicated to my father. It's dedicated to his memory. And there's a story in there that the coach relays to the client that is verbatim exactly what I experienced when my father passed away. And it is not a story. And I hope this story doesn't sound like something that is meant to be sad or depressing, because it's not. It's a story of hope. It's a story of encouragement. And it's a story of a guy who's sad, but who has moved on.
But it sounds like going through this process, you gained a better appreciation of the memory of your father.
Indeed. And I would say to you that every day his memory is a blessing.
I've had a couple losses like that too recently. So I understand where you're coming from. But let's kind of along this topic, discuss how to access both innovation and empathy for yourself and others, regardless of your circumstances, and find true personal freedom. Can you help us understand this a little bit more? We've talked about a little bit, innovation and empathy.
Yeah, innovation and empathy. It reminds me of a quote that's in the book from someone by the name of George Eliot. George Eliot famously said, "It's never too late to be who you might have been." And that quote for me is a real comfort, because what it says is that it's never too late to make a change. And that change might be in the way that you talk to your kids. It might be in the way that you show up for the people that work in your home business with you. There's always an opportunity to be who you might have been. And we all have a vision for ourselves, for our business, for our lives, relationships, for our finances. The message is that empathy can be focused on yourself if you choose to do so. And when you find a little compassion, you might find a little healing, and you might find some options that you didn't consider before. Because I know from my own experience as a recovering perfectionist that when I am beating myself up for the mistakes and treating myself like a variance that needs to be corrected, like an error that needs to be fixed, I'm not able to see innovation. I'm not able to see creativity. But sometimes when I step outside and I see the perfection in a flock of birds, or in the water in a stream near my home, when I see the perfection that's around me, I see that there's some kind of kindness in this design in the universe. It's not always a kindness that I share with myself, but from that place of getting back to nature, we can get back to our human nature and find some kindness, because as the saying goes, you will never regret being kind.
Yeah, we sure need more kindness out there, but I like your spin. Most people do think of empathy for others or some other situation, but that's an important point to remember, that you need to have some empathy for yourself.
Especially as a home business owner, it's easy to get lost in this idea that again, that we're errors that need to be corrected. And that's really the story of the client. That's where the client comes to the coach, feeling as if he's an error that needs to be corrected, that his life is a variance that needs to be adjusted, brought into alignment.
So in your empathy writing the book, you could see things from both the client and the coach's perspective then. I think that helped kind of weave it all together. Another core issue I see, core points of Easy are how resilience and adaptability are available to anyone, anytime, regardless of their circumstances. Do you have any final points to make on this key principle here about resilience and adaptability?
It's part of our DNA. Our ability to adapt is the reason for the innovations that we see in our society. It's the reason why people in 2022 have a higher IQ in general than people from 100 years ago. And that's not to say that people from the 1920s were not smart. What I'm saying is that we are wired to adapt, that we are wired to take in our circumstances, that creativity is not something out there that we have to reach for. Resilience is not something that we have to strive for or struggle for. It's something that's built into the system. And inside of Easier, I share a number of stories about people who have accessed a level of resilience because of difficult circumstances. And in fact, difficult circumstances that the client goes through, that show how we all can access resourcefulness and resilience if we allow ourselves to do so.
Great points. Well, besides ordering your book, what is one thing our listeners should do tomorrow to take action on some of these easier principles we've talked about here today?
Check out my YouTube channel. It's on youtube.com/Westfall online. There's a number of activities and exercises and ideas to help you to present with confidence, to help you to show up with greater innovation, to help you to access creativity and more. It's all about helping you to bring your best self to your work, your relationships, your life. And that's youtube.com/Westfall online.
Okay. We'll put some of these up on the web, the podcast page too, so that our readers can access this information. So, Chris Westfall, this has been a great discussion on making our work and life easier. Do you have any final points you'd like to share?
The final point that I would like to share is just a point of gratitude. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for allowing me to share
thanks for being
this
here.
story. Yeah, well, it's really a pleasure. It's great to see you again, and I hope that if folks are curious, that they will take the time to check out Easier, because it's a story, it's a journey, it's an easy read, and it's designed to help you to find the personal freedom and the healing that seems to be missing for a lot of folks, myself included.
I think we're all struggling to find that. So great points. And thanks for joining us today on the Home Business Podcast. Learn more about Chris Westfall on his book, Easier, 60 Ways to Make Your Life Work for You. Visit visit westfallonline.com. That's westfallonline.com, or our podcast website for more information on guests. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Home Business Podcast. Share your feedback with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our website, homebusinessmag.com. Subscribe to the newsletter, read our startup guide. For more information, visit homebusinessmag.com or the homebusinessexpo.com. I'm Richard Captain Henderson saying anchors away. We'll talk with you soon. Until then, make it a great, easier home-based day. Thank you.